everyone, and welcome to another episode of Alumni Chats, a weekly podcast featuring alumni from the Department of Broadcasting and Journalism at Western Illinois University. My name is Buzz Hoon. I'm the host of the podcast. I'm also the interim dean for the College of Fine Arts and Communication. Today, I'm talking with Jenel Bernstein Nels from the class of 2000. How are you, Jenel?
I am great. How are you?
Good. And, just to show what kind of front runner you were, you had a major in broadcasting and you had a major in journalism, right?
Correct. Yep. I've double majored and graduated in 4 years with both.
See, that shows that we should have been those areas should have been together back even before they got together. So glad to see you and to be able to catch up. Let's catch everybody up on where you are, what's going on in your life. Can you give me an update?
Sure. I currently live in Bettendorf, Iowa. I am married to my husband, Joe. We met at WIU. We've been married for this year. It'll be 21 years.
Wow.
I know. And then I have 2 kids. My son, Tyler, is 16. He's finishing up his sophomore year. And my daughter, Casey, is 14, and she is finishing up her 8th grade year.
Nice.
So, and then I'm currently working at John Deere, actually, in Moline, Illinois.
Okay. We're going to find all about what your current role is and what you're doing in that position. But let's go back to early influences. I always like to talk about, and I know family was and has been a priority for you. Let's talk about how, supportive your family was and things that growing up that you felt supported even before you went into high school and college.
Yeah. So I'm going to date myself here as if May of 2000 didn't date me. But when I was a teenager, I worked in a pizza place here in Bettendorf, Iowa. And back then they would play the radio stations over the air. And there was Casey Kasem was a big deal there on the weekends. And there was he talked one day about this special about if there's something you're interested in, don't waste time, just go for it. And I was telling my parents about that. And I always knew I liked to talk and I loved sports. So I naturally thought sports broadcast journalism would be great for me. So my parents told me to reach out to the local television stations here in town when I was in high school and see what I can do. And I did. And one of them was like, hey, come intern with us. So even in high school, my parents were pushing me to just figure out what I wanted to do with my path and what did I love. And that's actually where I knew this career in journalism and broadcasting and communications was where I was going to take my life. Wow.
That's such an amazing start to your journey, because I just think for a young person to have the confidence to call up and because, back then you couldn't email, you couldn't do some of the things you can do now. You had to put yourself out there and be in front of a bunch of adults to learn the ropes. And yet I'm sure people at the station were so supportive, even at that period of time, for a young person to help them out.
Yeah. So I can tell you, you're right. It was letters in the mail and then following up with phone calls. But when Dan Pearson at KWQC TV 6 at the time in Davenport, Iowa, called me back with my letter and was the one who invited me in. And I can tell you that 22 years-ish later, he is still one of the biggest mentors that I've ever had in my life. He followed me, helped me along my path through college, through my career changes over time, and just helped me realize that it's okay, to take, zigzags, turns, parallel paths, right? But it was probably the best thing I ever did was reaching out for what I wanted and finding somebody besides my parents who are the most supportive people, right? But finding somebody else who really got it and could kind of help guide me a little bit along the way.
And that's so awesome that you found early on somebody that was a good person and a good mentor. to you to help, shepherd you when they didn't have to do anything like that.
Exactly.
So what other things did you like to do in high school before you got in, other than you're spending your free time, obviously, helping out at the station for free as an intern? What other kind of things did you normally do as a high school person?
Yeah. So in high school, I went to Pleasant Valley High School. If anybody listening is familiar with the Quad Cities, and in high school, I was on the golf team, not varsity, but I tried really hard, and I played softball growing up in high school. And I was pretty privileged at Pleasant Valley that they were just starting to explore things they could do with local community colleges. And ironically, they actually had a learn how to shoot video type of class and things. So I started young and got to do stuff like that in high school, where I was going out and shooting stories with, then it was Students Against Drunk Driving had a club, right? And so I was very involved with that and would shoot stories for things before prom, and nothing you hear about today, but all things that were really big in the 90s, I guess I would say.
So at some point in time, you decide you're going to go to college, and you're going to try to pursue this interest that you have. And I like that your parents still have a story about your encounter with WIU. Could you share that, please?
Yeah. So I had narrowed my college picks down to 3. And again, this was the day before internet. So this was when you'd go to the mall and you would go to college fairs and figure out what they had to offer. And I had narrowed it down to 3 based on people I had met while interning in high school at the TV station. And WIU was not on my radar when I had it narrowed down, nor were any colleges in Iowa for that matter. But when we went to the mall at this college fair, there was a representative from WIU, and I was with my parents. And so they stopped to talk to them. And they were talking to my parents about how, our proximity had in-state tuition, and they did have this great broadcasting program that I should explore. So I agreed to go on a college visit with my parents to go to WIU, though I will tell you, I thought for sure I was going to a different university in Illinois. And when we went to Western, it was just that I didn't want a big college, right? So it was like that atmosphere where it felt big, but it was small enough that I could walk places. But we had a meeting with the Department of Communications and Broadcasting that day. And we went in there, and my dad he's just a fun guy, and he got to talk to you guys. And I don't think I did much talking that day. And they really sold him on the fact of she's only going to be an hour and a half away from home. You can get in-state tuition. We have our own television station here. She can audition to be a sports, reporter and broadcaster and anchor here for our station. And oh, by the way, we don't get a lot of local TV stations in our proximity, because I remember it was like, they showed my dad a picture of here's 3 circles of 3 markets, and we're right in the middle. So everybody's watching our local TV station. And my dad just felt like that was the place I needed to go. And we walked out and he's like, you're going to Western.
Nice.
And I was like, okay, I applied, and I'm not going to lie, it's probably the best decision. My parents, one of the few they made for me almost. But I agreed, it was the most welcoming atmosphere when we went in, and the fact that they loved it, almost more or as much as I did at the time, it was a no-brainer.
That is a great story. And so when you come to campus, what's one of the first things you remember getting involved with? You must have been an early person working with the newscast.
Yeah, so I actually got involved right away with the newscast. And when I went to Western, so I'm the middle of 3 kids in my family, and my brother, who's the oldest, was the first one to ever actually go to college. So he was a senior at Iowa State when I was a freshman. So I didn't have, I went there with what was called some kind of grant that I had where I could work, Western had to give me a job somewhere so I can help make money to pay my tuition, right? And I got a job in the broadcasting area working for Everett Nelson.
Yes.
And that was my first experience really with the department, because I started there right in my freshman year, and it was back when I used to take chords, remember, and you move from chord to chord to get things to play out and to make the newscast work. And so I think I had to work 10 hours a week with Everett. So that was my first, spot into the department. And then I took a shot my freshman year into putting together an audition tape on a 3/4-inch reel to audition for the sports anchor position, because I knew like that is what I wanted to do. And normally it was upperclassmen who would get those, anchor positions and stuff, but I just went for it. And so that's when I then started working with the TV station itself, right? And that was before I took the classes and things.
Right. So another thing that you mentioned that you ended up being one of our announcers, not only for women's basketball, but also for men's basketball.
Correct. Yep. So I don't remember what year I did that, but I was the color commentator for men's basketball games, and I was the play-by-play for our women's basketball games. I will say that was probably one of the biggest highlights of my time at Western, more so because I was the only female who was doing it at the time in that sports world. And I know today now it's a lot more, women and females are involved, with sports, but back then it wasn't. And so I was, I had to fight for every spot that I got, and it was awesome. I just loved it.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. That whole thing that I want people that are current students to realize is we're the only female around a whole bunch of guys that, naturally kind of have their own little cliques or groups or whatever. And so those are all kind of things that you faced. I'm sure, whether you've ever mentioned it to me or to anybody else about how, you're just that's something that early female broadcasters sort of had to find their way in and get their foot in the door.
It's exactly right. And when I did play-by-play and color, the person, I don't remember his name today, but the person who did it with me when I did the color commentary, the one who was doing play-by-play, he worked for Macomb Radio too. So he was in the broadcast program, right? But here he had like a real job, worked in radio, was a shoo-in. Everybody knew who he was. And when we had those positions then, so we auditioned for them, we got them, right? But we also then had to take it as part of like a class where then we had to go do a certain amount of stories on the players. So I would have to carry the camera, go in, interview these 6'5" basketball players and make sure they knew that I knew what I was doing, right? To be respected in that world. And I can tell you, I feel like those experiences and doing things like that outside of your comfort zone, man, looking back today, those set you up for a very successful career.
I think that was Michael Morrissey that you worked with.
Yes, that's who it was. I thought his name was Mike or Michael, and yep, you're exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, every once in a while, I'll have a memory of that will come back to me about certain people. So other things you like to do as a WIU student, other faculty, student memories that if I say, can you recall some of the things you like doing up there?
Yeah, I mean, I was in a sorority when I was at WIU. So I did that all 4 years, which was great because, again, like it just gets you out of your comfort zone, things like that. I participated in a lot of the different on-campus like homecoming activities and programs. And you said it earlier, but I was also a journalism major, which they were two different entities back then.
That's
so I
right.
did a lot of writing in other aspects as well too, and really enjoyed. I never actually wrote for the newspaper because I spent all of my time in the newsroom sense, but just actually loved like being part of that atmosphere and getting to work with those teams and those groups and doing that stuff as well.
And so I'm interested to find out, how did you meet your husband?
So I lived in Thompson Hall which I know is still a thing at
Mhm.
WIU, because we actually, our proximity, we go back to WIU quite a bit. But so I lived in Thompson Hall, and my husband was an RA in
Oh,
Thompson Hall. And so he was working the front desk, and he was friends with my RA. And so when I saw him working the front desk, I'm like, oh, who's that guy? And my RA is like, oh, you should meet him. So we all went to a football game together. And, you know, we met in 1997. So however many years later, you know, we are still together. And it's funny because you hear about like Big 10 schools and Big 12 schools, you know, that everybody cheers for. I will say our kids know everything about WIU, because that is like the one nugget that probably still connects us today, because he's from Chicago.
so yeah, and his last name, Nels, is
Nels, yeah.
Yeah. And so the only thing I always thought was and then after you got married, I thought, well, her first name is very close to her. Did you?
Yep. And people actually, when we got engaged while we were at WIU still, so the big talk was, are you going to keep Bernstein? And I actually don't keep Bernstein. I just use it for social media and things, just because that is still my identity, right? But when I started working for Dan Pearson in Davenport here as an intern, he started calling me Nellie. And that was before I met Joe. So it just kind of stuck. So then Nellie Nels actually kind of became like my nickname after that. Cause I'm like, well, that works. And, you know, I wasn't on air or anything, but I'm like, that could have been like a great name.
That would have been, that would have been, somebody would have thought you made that up.
Yeah, I know, right? Like I planned
it. So after your graduation from WIU, you head to the Chicago suburbs, and tell us about your first job.
Yeah. So like I said, I was engaged, and my husband was adamant on the fact he wasn't moving to Iowa. So I packed up after graduation and went to the Chicago suburbs. And my first job was actually doing page layout for a weekly newspaper. So I literally would take all of the ads and arrange them so that the copy could fit around them. And I did that during the day. And then I worked at a cable TV station. So at the time it was AT&T broadband, at night, literally loading like PBS tapes into recorders every hour. So people who came in and they wanted to have their own TV shows, right? So they would rent this studio at the cable TV station, make a show, and then I would load those tapes in so that they would play back on a certain schedule. And every now and then I would have to like change the lighting and things for them so that their show looked great. And that was my first job, glamorous job. So, you know, I had been interning for years. I interned at WLS in Chicago when I was in college. And then my first job is page layout. And then that didn't pay the bills. So at night I worked at a cable TV station, popping tapes into a machine.
Well, that, you know, I want people to understand that, you know, you had this desire to, you know, get your foot in the door. And,
and that's what it was.
And that's what you were going to do. You know, come hell or high water, you're going to do that. And that is an admirable thing for a young person to decide early on that they will, you know, do whatever it takes. And it eventually led, right, to you getting an opportunity as a sports coordinator. Is that right?
Yeah. So when I worked those two jobs for maybe about a year, a little bit less. And then AT&T was kind of remolding how they handled things. So instead of just having these like PBS types of shows, they wanted to start broadcasting Friday night high school football games, which are a big thing. So if you're anywhere in the Midwest or have kids, you know, Friday night football is a big deal. And so they opened up 3 sports coordinator positions when they were going through actually a reorg, and Comcast was buying them. And so I applied for one of these jobs, and I was actually told, like, there is no way you would get this position by some of the other people who were loading tapes that I worked with. But the job was, you were going to produce all week the high school football game. So like you have to hire crews, you know, who's going to shoot it, like 4 camera people, and then you would work like in a truck. So similar to what WIU had back in the day with like the RV, right? Like you would work in the truck and you would be the director. And then it was your job to go out at the beginning of the week and get footage that can be replayed ahead of time. And then you direct it as live events. And I applied anyway, regardless of, the people who told me I didn't have a shot. And I got one of those 3 positions to cover the north suburbs. So I was the producer, director, running the show, like making the calls, doing the interviews with the teams and the players ahead of time to have a pre-show role. And I did that for probably about 1.5 years, maybe 2 years, before there was like another change within the Comcast organization. So
then you had an opportunity to move into Milwaukee. Is that right?
Yes.
The TV market. So
yep.
How did that happen?
So while I was doing that job as a sports coordinator, I could sense the writing on the wall and where things were going, right? Mm-hmm. Like I could sense where things were going within Comcast. I also knew that wasn't going to be my end game job. And so I had been putting feelers out there, applying for different positions. And my husband had a good job. I didn't want to ask him to move if we didn't have to. So I had applied to this CBS affiliate up in Milwaukee. They had a part-time position to work the assignment desk. And maybe I could produce when somebody had to take off on a weekend. So I went up and interviewed for that position. And then it turns out about the week after I interviewed for that position, I actually lost my job in Comcast. So they downsized and 3/4 of the people doing what I did got a severance package. And the day I got that severance package, I got a phone call and offered this part-time job in Milwaukee. So I took it because I knew it was part-time, but that was my foot in the door, right? To actually start getting into what I really wanted to do. And did I want to work the assignment desk? No. Did I like cold calling like police on beat calls? No. But was it like a job doing what I wanted to do? Absolutely.
Yeah. And, I hope that students realize that sometimes in that time of professional and personal growth, where it's not always going to be pleasurable in terms of it's not the what I want to do. It's sometimes what I have to do in order to eventually get to where I want to be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I knew that was the right move for me at the time. And I'll be honest, I was working at the Gap at night, to make up the difference in, the money to be able to help pay my way. I was married by then. And also we didn't have to move. My husband never had to change his job because we were in the Chicago suburbs. So the proximity to Milwaukee was really great. And it just opened that door and was able to teach me some of the things that I needed to learn at the time, like real life experiences at that time.
Okay. So then how did you make your way back to Chicago after Milwaukee?
Yeah. So while I was in Milwaukee, I was constantly looking for the next opportunity of getting myself in somewhere full time. I didn't really see anything opening up anytime soon where I was at, though I was getting good hours. So I had interviewed in Madison, Wisconsin, which would have required us to move. And then I had also interviewed at this cable TV station that was owned by WGN in the Chicago area. It's called CLTV. Mm-hmm. Both at the same time. I was actually offered positions at both places because those interviews kind of went all around the same time. And I kind of looked at it as a perspective of one is, again, back to kind of cable TV, but it's owned by WGN. It's going to offer me potentially more opportunities to grow and meet people as opposed to Madison, which was a great community, but my husband would have to quit his job, right? Yeah. So I took the opportunity at CLTV, which was a full-time position. And that's how I eventually got back into the Chicago area. And a little interesting note on that, I worked there about a year. And then the person who was working the assignment desk full-time in Milwaukee that I had met, his name was Dominic. He came and worked at CLTV when the next job opening came up.
Well, and again, another life lesson for our young people is that all these connections will eventually, you're proving yourself to somebody and you never burn bridges. You always
Yep.
think about how the interconnectedness will eventually somehow in some way pay off for you, if you are a good if you have a good work ethic, good character, and show that to people, they recognize it.
Yeah. And if you find great people that you work with along the way, and those great people, you're going to consistently find paths to either work with each other or even network each other if your lives take you in two different directions, because those connections mean so much more at the end of the day sometimes than the paycheck, to be honest.
So let's talk about the big time opportunity that it rolls around with WMAQ.
Yeah.
Because that was, that's big time market.
Yeah. And that was my dream job. I'm not going to lie. I mean, and I scored it young, right? But it wasn't without taking another risk in my career, which is what I hope people realize, is that risks are scary, but sometimes risks are worth it. So I saw an opening for a news writer. So I was a producer when I was at CLTV, but I saw an opening for a news writer position at WMAQ, and I was able to get that interview. And I didn't know anybody there at that station, but I got the interview, went there, and I was told in the interview, I can't guarantee you any hours. This is a freelance position. That is, you don't get benefits with this position. You might only get 2 hours with this position. We might call you and be like, you have to come in tonight, or are you available? And I decided to take a shot, take the chance and see what happened. I talked to my husband about it, but I had also seen that some of their news writers who were there on freelance had been there for years. And as long as they like you, this is, to me, I felt like it was them testing me, right? So I come in as a freelancer, and if I do my job well, there could be an opportunity for me. And so I did. I took that freelance position. I actually had my son already at that time too when I took that position. So it was a huge risk because I had a baby at home. I never got less than 40 hours a week when I was a freelance news writer. And within a year, I was hired as a full-time news writer. And a year later, I was promoted to a full-time 6 a.m. morning show producer.
Okay. So you're proving yourself, and you're in this, as you said, sort of a dream job. Yep. And let's let people know what the hours were for that dream job.
Yeah. So my dream job, the 6 a.m. newsroom producer, I got to WMAQ at about 11 p.m. at night, and I left at about 10 a.m. in the morning. And then I would go home and I would sleep for about 3 hours and then go pick my kids up from daycare. And then I would go back to bed at 6:30 at night, wake up at 10:15 to drive downtown and do it again.
Oh my gosh.
For 8 years.
How long? 8 years?
8 years.
That is amazing that, physically that you were able to do that kind of, your body and everything else mentally, it had to be exhausting.
Yeah. I think I was just in such a groove that I will say Fridays were exhausting because that's when you would flip your schedule. So try to stay up as late as you can. And Monday mornings were exhausting because it was hard to get to bed on a Sunday night. But to me, that shift, honestly, was the only shift I could work, because the people who worked on that sweet spot shift of 8 to 5, because they did the 4 p.m. newscast, they've been there for 30 years.
Yeah.
And here's me in my 20s, early 30s, and they were not going to leave anytime soon. And if I wanted to see my children, that was my option. Like, I knew the 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. shift of that 10 p.m. newscast, right? That would never be in my future. Never. Because once I became a mom, I wasn't willing to give up everything. Once my kids went to school, I would never see them.
Yeah. So there had to be times where you had some great memories, some great joys within your job. What kind of things have you shared with your kids and said, Mom was there when?
Yeah, so there are so many experiences like that. And I only wish my kids were older that because they were there and part of it, but don't remember it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one thing was the Chicago Blackhawks when they won their first championship in 2010, and then they followed it up and it's probably right behind me on the wall, but 2013 and then again in
Yep.
2015, right? But the one in 2010, those games would happen at night. So I was the one who then created the story around them the next morning when I would go into work. And when they won the championship, I was actually on my way to work, stopped at Dick's Sporting Goods, bought the championship t-shirts on my way to work, and then got told that I could help produce the rally. So as the Blackhawks were producing the rally, I was on the stage right in front of the Blackhawks talking and everything like that. I still have my media pass hanging on my wall in the other room from where I'm sitting right now. So that was one of the biggest highlights of my career. There was also anybody, maybe people's parents might remember this, but back in like 2010, 2011, we had the blizzard of all blizzards in Chicago, and like cars were stuck for multiple hours on Lakeshore Drive and couldn't go anywhere, running out of gas. And I actually spent 3 days in that newsroom because we were on the air around the clock.
You never left?
And I walked across the street after day one. I walked across the street when somebody came in to take over for me in the booth to the Sheridan Hotel, was across the street from the NBC Tower. Asked them for a room. They had a room. I went upstairs, slept for 6 hours, walked back into the NBC Tower. And it was it was 3 days like that, but which sounds crazy, but gosh, the adrenaline and just the people still talk about those blizzards today. Yeah. And I can tell you exactly what I did, where I was, and honestly, how we were helping people at the time.
And so, because you're providing important news for people, a great deal of people, and that makes a difference. Let's talk about the challenge. Not only the hours and everything else, but sometimes dealing with stories that you can't be impervious to. Yeah.
So as you work in news, and you have to have a thick skin, right? Like you have to not take things personally. And there's a lot of negative stories that we hear, and especially in the Chicago area because the market's huge, right? So there's so many negative stories. And so you learn to develop a thick skin, not think much about it. But there towards the end of my career in broadcasting, there was a couple of situations where I would hear a story and I would kind of blow it off and be like, whatever. And that's when I think I realized that I wasn't being like the person that I wanted to be anymore, because I in my mind, I was losing my heart a little bit because I was blowing off all of these tragic stories that I would hear so much about that were affecting so many people, but I was like, whatever. And I think that was the biggest challenge for me. And it really started to weigh on me in about like the last year or so of my time in news.
So how did you make the transition from working, in the news, in television news, to working for a corporate heavyweight like John Deere?
Yeah, so we had gone on a family vacation to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and it was a whole week of just sitting outside with the open air and the trees and no police sirens and ambulances, and it was kind of like an eye-opening, like weight-lifted vacation. And my husband will tell you the whole way back, I probably cried in the car, like the whole way back, because I just felt like the whole drive back to Chicago, I was losing a piece of myself that I found in Tennessee. And when I got back to work the next morning, in my inbox was my husband's resume. And he said, if it means that much to you, because I was the breadwinner of our family, right? So I can't make these huge decisions, but he's like, if it means that much to you, I'm willing to move and we can go back to your hometown, which he said he would never live in. Wow. Or we can find a place like Tennessee, because that's where we had just left from. So Facebook was a thing by now. And I reached out to somebody on Facebook who's actually an old teacher at my high school and was like, hey, do you know if there'd ever be a communications job open at John Deere? And he told me who to get in touch with, which was like a temp agency. So I reached out to the temp agency and they said, we don't have anything right now. And I said, well, just keep my resume, for when you do, because I'd be interested to learn more about it. And at the time, I was also having interviews at WGN for another position for producing, but that would have been overnight. Like WBBM Radio had interviewed me. So, because I was looking for a career change at that point anyway. And lo and behold, I got this phone call from a temp agency saying, well, somebody just left in communications. Are you interested in the interview? And so I drove back to Moline, took the interview, and it turns out they were looking for somebody who knew how to shoot and edit video.
Wow.
Because they felt like the way to communicate to employees was in this ever-changing digital world, right? And that was a capability that their department did not have. But again, this was a contingent position, so there was no benefits, no guarantee of a full-time job, and contingents at the time could only work for 3 years. And it was a 50% pay cut.
Oh.
So I talked to my husband and we decided that we could make it work and figure it out. Like we couldn't afford to buy a house. So my father-in-law bought one and we rented it, and within a year, I was then hired on full-time in a communications position at John Deere.
That is another amazing little jig-jag within your story. And I think you mentioned that at some point in time, you talked to somebody that recognized you from WIU.
Yeah. So my first position into Deere was in like internal communications. And then at John Deere, you can take a lot of different positions within the company, right? So your career doesn't get stale and you're constantly learning and growing. And I had always promised myself, whatever position I took, I would not give up on the part that I'm passionate about, which is the creativity, the storytelling, and those pieces. So there was a job opening in the brand department of John Deere, which would have been a lateral position for me. And so I applied for it, and the hiring manager at the time did a phone screening. So she called me and she's like, I guess I just don't understand how somebody with like a career in television could be a brand marketing person. And one thing I want people to always know is that the skills you learn from WIU translate into so many things. So if you're working in a newsroom, you're on deadlines by the minute, right? That translates into so many different things that potential employers are looking for, because it's your ability to multitask, to, play audibles, like to do all different things. And so I explained to her how ratings work and the ratings of sales and what that equals and what does that mean for marketing and a corporate perspective. And that was a half-hour conversation turned into an interview. So I got to the interview and then she sees me in person and we're talking and she's like, you just look so familiar. She's like, I went to Western and I graduated in 1999 in marketing. And I was like, oh, I wonder if we have mutual friends. And then she goes, wait, you were on the TV station. And I go, yeah, I was. And she's like, yeah, I watched the TV station. You were the sports person on the news. And I'm like, exactly, I was. And I ended up getting that job. She's actually one of my best friends today.
That is great.
Which is super funny, but yeah.
That is so wonderful. And as you said, all the skills that you were taking and being able to transfer to this new role. And I'm sure still there were times where you've felt the challenge of just being in a different environment with people that are more business related or math related, and how, which I'm very proud of, that you are a communications person and you are doing just fine in that environment.
Yeah, for sure. I say I've been at John Deere 11 years now, including that 1 year as a contingent. And I say all the time that there's so many meetings I go into with very, very high level leadership that I definitely do not feel like the smartest person at the table, because I don't have that business degree. But the degree I do have teaches me how I call it like a human degree almost, because I know how to talk to people. my job is to tell great stories. My job is to market our products, right? But I market our products through the stories of our customers. And that is what I feel like I am passionate about it every day. And I feel like it's because I get to use those skills that I learned and the things I've loved since I was a kid. And I can translate that into a career where I don't have to talk the numbers, but I can put out a press event or a customer event and have people write back in a survey that was the best experience they've ever had. And then they bought a machine into those same numbers.
Yeah. And one of the things you mentioned which I thought was really cool about the joy from the job. And you mentioned something that you're proud to be associated with. And you mentioned that the first tee golf program that
Yes.
John Deere has been associated with.
Yeah. So when I took that position in the brand department, it evolved over time a little bit to John Deere wanted to talk about the things that it sponsors, like quietly on the side, right? Not just the equipment, but all the things it does for the community.
Yeah.
And so the first P is an organization John Deere supports very heavily. And they wanted to kind of showcase that during the John Deere Classic. So I was assigned to help produce a national TV commercial, 30-second TV commercial for that. So I found the location, worked with an agency. We found the right person to be the star of that commercial, and it aired during the John Deere Classic. And then I carried that experience over into an actual interactive area as part of the John Deere Classic. And that was just one of a few different spots that we did while I was in there, but it's still one of my proudest moments in my John Deere career because it was something so new, and it just was something that I knew I could make really great if I was part of it. So really it's an outside agency who does the producing and the interviewing, but I was along for the ride on the shoots, storyboards, every aspect of the way.
And what I think is really terrific about your story is that you've been able to find this blend now between career, which you're doing great in, and family. And because family's always been so important to you, that you've been able to see the family, your kids growing up.
Yeah. And that was the big reason why I did make a career shift, because for me, I made that decision. I wanted to be a wife and a mom first and have a career second. While I took a few steps back along the way, I can honestly say that my career is fantastic, but I'm also in a career today where I do travel quite a bit to go out and make these stories and get these customer stories, but I can pick and choose which ones I attend and which ones I hire somebody to go on. So I've never missed a cross country meet, don't miss a track meet, don't miss dance competitions. I might be helping with homework over FaceTime, sometimes when I'm on the road, but I really try to adjust my schedule so that I can be present and in the moment to see those important moments in my kids' lives too. And I'm lucky enough to have an opportunity where I can really succeed in both.
That's wonderful. And, just as you have had mentors in your life, and I know you're mentoring other people, let's provide our young students with some advice for their careers if they are wondering. So can you share some of what you've learned over this period of time?
Yeah, I would say never be scared to take a risk. The risk could pay off, and it might not pay off, but no matter what you do, you will always be a better person in what you're doing by taking that risk, even if it's just proving to yourself that I tried it and I did it, because you will be more confident the next time to take that same leap, and it might not be a risk in the sense that time. So that would be number one. Number two would be your goals are your goals. So you set your goals for yourself. You're the one achieving your own goals. Don't let other people decide what those goals are or should be for you. And it is okay to alter them over time, but it doesn't mean that altering them is bad. Alter them is just a way that you're growing and you're adjusting based off of where your life is today. So always look out for you.
Well, I couldn't be happier for you because it seems like you're in a good place, and I'm so glad that you agreed to catch up with me on on what's going on in your life.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been great.
And thanks to all of our weekly viewers out there. Remember, if you're interested in being a guest or want to recommend someone, just send me an email. We want to hear from our alums, and we hope that everyone continues to watch and listen to the podcast, and really appreciate everyone's support. So until next week, stay safe, take care, and God bless.